Hello and welcome to the Danesh Show. I'm Eva Danesh. Today we are joined by the Honorable Julian Gold. Dr. Gold is a two-time mayor of Beverly Hills and a current member on our city council. He has placed heavy emphasis on the health and safety of our city, and he is currently running for another term on our city council. So Dr. Gold, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is really a privilege to be in this studio.
Thank you. So today we're going to go over a little bit about your past, what you've accomplished as mayor and on city council, and see a little bit into your vision for the future of our city.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So I recently learned that you grew up in New York, the great city of New York City. Can you tell me a little bit about how your childhood was like there, and maybe some of the similarities you noticed between New York and Beverly Hills?
You know, I grew up in a very middle-class neighborhood in a place that became famous later. It's called Forest Hills. It was in Queens, one of the boroughs of New York. Forest Hills was known for its tennis stadium, which ultimately became the big tennis stadium. But they moved it when it became big. But as a kid, it was about 10 blocks from my house, and my friends and I would sneak in the back. And these are the days where tennis courts were that's my New York, by the way, tennis courts were grass. And everybody only wore white. And the rackets were made of wood, and they were small. And the stadium had concrete seats that were very uncomfortable. And you never clapped or hit. All that happened was if you liked the particular volley, you would snap your fingers. Then that was like huge applause. And if you were unhappy with the referee, and that was about as much as it went. You know, it was a great place to grow up. It was very, very family. I could play in the street. It was safe. My public school was down the block, so I walked to school, and it was just a great place to grow up. In many ways, like our community, only a lot colder.
Do you notice any more similarities between Beverly Hills and New York, or any differences that you had to adapt to when you arrived?
Well, New York is not quite the car city that LA is. New York is really much more. I ultimately lived in Manhattan, and Manhattan, you know, is very congested. The subways, you sort of like this, you can't budge, and even on street corners, there are lots and lots of people, and so it's got a different kind of energy and vibe to it. Here we do the same thing, but we all do it in our cars. We have congestion. The only difference is that you're surrounded by a car, and there are hundreds of cars around you. But I think that over time, what was a big difference, which was New York was much more urban, and LA, when I got out here in the 80s, early 80s, was sort of starting, but not really. But I think over time, Los Angeles has become more urban and has more of a city feel, and there are bigger buildings and in certain parts more pedestrian congestion, things like that. So, and I think too that we've seen numbers of restaurants, kinds of restaurants, all kinds of cultural activities. I think that over my time here, we've really seen that grow in this area. And so today I think the differences are, other than the weather, are much smaller than they once were. You know.
And when you came to Los Angeles, you became an anesthesiologist at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, right next to Beverly Hills. So you were there for 40 years. You were the co-chair of the department. What inspired you to get into being a doctor or being an anesthesiologist?
Well, first off, I trained in New York. When I went to college, I went to CCNY. At the time, CCNY had graduated, City College of New York, CCNY, had graduated, had more Nobel laureates than any other university in the country. I used to ride the subway to get there. It took me a couple of subways. Actually, it took me a bus to get to the subway twice. I actually thought I was going to make airplanes. When I started out, I really thought I was going to make airplanes. I was fascinated by airplanes. And two things happened. One was the Vietnam War. And if I had continued down that path, I likely would have gotten drafted. And the second was that I didn't kind of like what it was going to take for me to get to be an aeronautical engineer. I just didn't like all the math and all that. It wasn't for me. So somewhere in my junior year, I sort of switched track and I got a degree in biology. And with that, I applied to medical school. It actually was a good lesson that served me well for most of the rest of my life. Up until that moment in time where I changed majors, I had sort of been programmed to go from here to here to here to here to here. And this was really the first time that I took a pause and said, well, maybe I want to do something different. And having done that, having taken that pause, done something different, and ultimately been successful at it, it actually gave me greater strength to be able to do that as I move forward in my life. So it was a very important time for me in terms of my growing and my intellectual understanding of the world. I went through medical school, and I was determined I was going to be a surgeon. Excuse me. I actually was a surgical resident for a couple of years, and guess what? I didn't really like that either, and so that same lesson, a buddy of mine came to me one day and said, well, have you ever thought about being an anesthesiologist? So we share an operating room. We sort of share this working platform. The surgeon does what they do, and the anesthesiologist does what they do, and very much a partnership. And, you know, I like the environment. I actually liked the operating room environment a lot. It was kind of sexy, you know, masks and gloves and all this kind of stuff, you know. So I said, well, okay, I'm comfortable in this environment. I just don't want to be doing the surgery. And so I figured I would try anesthesia. I'd see what, and it turned out I just really liked it. I seemed to have an aptitude for it, and it was just the place for me to be. I got to be in this environment, which I really liked. Ultimately, I got to take care of really sick people and hopefully do some good things. And it was just one of those things that in the end worked great. I came out here just thinking I was going to practice. I didn't know if I was going to stay. I actually came out here. I left my apartment in New York. I still had it. I left most of my clothes in New York because they were, you know, cold weather clothes. And I took a leave of absence from my New York job. And I came out here, I took this job at Cedars, I rented an apartment, I rented furniture. I did.
So you had a little bit of permanency in there.
Yeah, well, I figured if I needed to leave, I could. You know, I didn't know. I was the only one I knew. I had 2 or 3 friends in California. That was about it. And I knew I was not going home, or back to New York, which was then home. I knew I wasn't going back because in the middle of my second year here, I had rented the furniture from Roberts Rents Furniture. They're out of business. But I got a letter from them that said, congratulations, you've leased it so long, you own it. You own it. So I figured, well, I own the furniture, I can't go back now, right? And I think that was just, that just kind of said to me, you're in the right space. 10 years later, the then chairman of the department, there were several, but one of them was thinking to retire, and he came to me and he said, listen, I don't want to be chairman anymore. This is 1991. Would you like to be chairman of the department? And I said, sure, thank you for trusting me with that. And in 94, we created the medical group. At the time, we had about 30 physicians. And over the course of the next almost 30 years, we grew the group to be over 130 doctors. We have 80 trainees. We created a business office that had 40 or 50 people working for us. And it became a thing. I mean, it became a really big thing. And I wish I could say I was so smart that I set out to get there, but it just happened. You follow the path, and you make the corrections as you need to, and ultimately, hopefully, you'll end up successful.
Great piece of advice.
Yeah.
You spoke earlier about how the operating room is really a partnership between the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, and all the nurses involved. And you were really a big figure in the Department of Anesthesiology at Cedars and had a lot of doctors under you. How did the skills you learned and developed at Cedars really transfer over to your position in our city?
Well, I think that physicians, most physicians by their nature, the first thing we do, we are critical thinkers. You know, if you're an internist, you talk about differential diagnosis. So you see something, and it may not be obvious what it is, but it could be one of a handful of things. And so how do I distinguish between A and B and C? How do I do that? For anesthesia, it's even a little more critical because while most of the times things just go very smoothly, every once in a while something happens and it becomes a matter of understanding what's going on. You have to begin to make some pretty quick decisions about what am I going to do. And sometimes you don't have to do anything and it just kind of fixes itself, but sometimes not so. And so I think that ability to critically think, to prioritize, to kind of work through a list, even if things aren't going well, to kind of work through it until they're okay, you know, is really something that helped me a lot in my life. You know, I think I bring that skill to most things that I do. I also think that when you talk about teamwork, so operating rooms are very much teamwork. It takes everybody in that operating room to keep a patient safe and to do the procedure well. And whether it's the nurses or the aides or the folks who clean the room, the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, you know, the house staff, everybody's got a job. And everybody has to know what their job is. They have to execute their job. But you also have to be able to interact with people in a way that allows them to do their job and allows them to do it in an effective sort of way. And often it's the anesthesiologist who sort of directs that. The surgeon's busy doing what he's doing. And the anesthesiologist really has the different perspective of what's going on to be able to control what's happening with the patient, but also to begin to move people around the room to do other things. And I think that as a skill, to be able to work with people, to know how to work with people, to speak their language and to have people do what they need to do in the most efficient way they can, has been a very valuable skill too. And you know, I think that more important than anything probably is as a physician, as a working physician, we learn to be compassionate with people. We learn how to talk to people. We take care of people in some of the best and worst moments of their life. And we have to make a connection. And as anesthesiologists, often we don't have a lot of time with the patient before we start. You know, we meet them just before we begin. And it's really important to create rapport. It's important to have somebody be comfortable with the fact that you're going to take good care of them. And it's important to reassure them and their family that, you know, we're going to do everything we can and chances are they're going to be perfectly fine. I think those are skills that translate. I think that they're basic human skills that translate into other parts of our life. And, you know, when you take a look at the city's a team. You know, everybody's got a job, everybody's got to perform. We have to interact. Our role as council members is to listen to the community and listen to the staff and to try and put things together in a way that makes sense and we get the greatest common good, you know, and that's what we do. You know, we listen to the residents. You know, people call me all the time, you know, and these days, if you want, you can even put it on the website. You know, there are all kinds of people who email things, and that's great. You know, we look forward to that kind of stuff because that way we know what the community is. And by the same token, sometimes people will call us and they're really upset because something should have happened and didn't happen, or happened that shouldn't have happened. And for us, we want to represent the city. We want to fix it. We want to reassure them that it's going to be okay. And I think those are the same sort of skills about how do you deal with people? How do you talk to people? How are you effective at getting things done? How do you move resources to where they have to be? And at the end of the day, how do we keep the city healthy? And that's really what it's about.
So you obviously have the skill set to be a leader in our community, but what really compelled you to run for city council that first time and to be a leader in our community?
That's a really good question. You know, I started with my daughter. So my daughter's a product of the schools. She graduated the high school in 2009. She played varsity soccer and varsity softball, and that was a large part of our life. We spent a lot of time on these fields. And along the way, but you know, that started in the community. It started with youth sports, it started with Little League and ASO and all of that. And we got connected to the community, you know, and we really got connected to the community, and it was good. I enjoyed that. And along the way, somebody, a former council member, Willie Bryan, was going to run for the school board, and he was an orthopedic surgeon, and one night he and I in the operating room late one night, you know, after the sun went down and he's operating and I'm giving anesthesia there, and Willie turns to me and says, well, you know, I think I'm going to run for the school board. Do you want to work on my campaign? And I said, sure, what does that mean? You know, what do I have to do? And that was kind of the beginning of it. Willie introduced me to folks. And from his campaign, he was successful. In his campaign, I worked on other campaigns, and I met some folks. And then there was an opportunity. I did Team Beverly Hills, which I would recommend to every resident, including young ones like you. A great experience to learn all about our city. And there are applications online that you should take a look at.
What kind of program is that for?
So Team Beverly Hills is an introductory, like an introductory leadership program. There are, I think, 12 sessions, and you spend one with the police, and one with the fire, and one with public works, and the library, and the management and policy folks, and it teaches you about the city. And so you get to meet the people who actually make the city go, right? Now, there are some perks. The police guys take you down on their firing range, and, you know, and the fire guys will cook you dinner. And
you get the full experience.
The whole deal, and they're really good cooks. And so what comes from that is hopefully a much deeper understanding of the city and what makes it go. So I did that, great experience. And from that, I applied to Traffic and Parking Commission, which I served on for 6 years. And from there, I served on Rec and Park for a while. And finally, one day, a friend of mine said, you know, maybe you ought to run for city council. And, you know, I had thought about it, but I guess I hadn't thought about it quite that seriously until that moment in time. And I said, you know what, I think I'm going to do it. It turns out that in the middle of this, I'd been ill for a while. And my daughter was 16 at the time. And the community really came together for us in all kinds of ways you can hardly imagine. I mean, people, I was in the hospital, but people would leave food on our doorstep for my wife. And people would drive my daughter around. You know, she had great friends, has great friends. She was part of the team, but the teammates would kind of schlep her out and get her some ice cream and do stuff like that. And, you know, it made me recognize exactly how great this community is, how deep and emotional. And, you know, that really said to me, you need to give back. You need to pay that back, pay it forward. And so that really, propelled me. I figured, okay, I'm going to run for council and see what I can do.
And can you tell me a little bit more about how serving on those two committees really contributed to what you perceived the city to be?
Yeah. So traffic and parking, and so we have 11 commissions now, and they run the gamut. Some deal with arts and culture, some deal with health and safety. Traffic and parking and recreation and parks really are the two that I think probably interface the most with the public. Everybody worries about traffic. Everybody worries about parking, right? And our parks and our recreation and Rec and Parks also deals with preschool and deals with seniors. So it's a broad swath of the community. So it really offered me the opportunity to get introduced to better into that part of the community. The other thing was it was a lesson in government. It was really a lesson in participatory government. So as you sit on a commission, it looks like the city council, you know, they're appointed, we're elected, but and as participatory government, it's an interface with the public. The public comes and speaks. There's a cadence to how things get done and who can speak when and what the rules are and the Brown Act and all this kind of stuff, which is really key to government. And in that environment, you really get an understanding of how it works. And so for me, it was a primer. It was really a primer of government, how government works, and what is the interaction between these commissions and the public. What is that public interface? What does that look like? And, you know, I like that. I mean, the public came and spoke their mind. And, you know, sometimes the rooms were filled with people who had an opinion about something. And that's the best time. You know, the worst time for us, either on the commission or on the council, is when we're having a conversation and there's nobody in the audience, right? We're kind of talking to ourselves. We don't want to be doing that. We want the community input. We want to hear what the community thinks. And so if nobody shows up, then we can only guess. So for me, the best times were when we had a room full of people who all felt passionately one way or another about an issue, and we could sort of hash it out and come to hopefully a consensus about whatever the issue might be.
And if the people do want to attend a committee meeting, how do they know when they are and how they can get there?
So all of the city commissions and the city council meetings, all those meetings are listed on the city website. Not only are they listed on the city website, but they're all televised, and they're simulcast. Is that right? Webcast, yeah,
Online.
whatever. Online, and then they're archived, so that if you had an interest in a particular meeting which you missed, you can go back and you can see it. It's online. And so anybody who's interested can find when the next take your pick commission meeting is, or city council. City council usually meets every other Tuesday, starting with the first Tuesday of the month. We mess it up every once in a while because somebody's traveling or something. But for the most part, it's every other week. And we invite the public always.
So you served on the Traffic Commission for a number of years, and when you were on City Council, you did make some changes, some improvements to the traffic in our city. Can you tell us a little bit about what those improvements were and how they reflected upon what you learned on the Traffic Commission?
Well, traffic is always a problem in our city. I think the traffic, as the population of the state in Los Angeles increases, our traffic is going to get worse. I think the thing, even with the subway coming, I think we're going to find that it will, for a while, make things a little bit better, but ultimately there'll be more people and we're going to have the same kind of traffic we have now. If you take a look, for instance, at Wilshire Boulevard, it's never going to get any wider. There are only a certain number of cars that can go through Wilshire Boulevard. We've done things like removing parking off Olympic Boulevard during peak hours. We've done things to restrict when and where you can turn in order to keep traffic flowing. We've done a fair amount of work in terms of the sequencing of lights so that people can move fairly quickly through a particular area. The problem with those sorts of things is they all have consequences. So people have said, well, why is it that I ever get caught on a red light on Santa Monica Boulevard? Why can't I just go right through the city? And the answer is, well, because while that might make sense if you're heading east or west, it does terrible things to the people who are moving north and south. And so when the traffic engineers actually do these sorts of things, they do work to figure out, well, okay, if we do this, what's the impact on that? And sometimes you don't actually see an impact except for a couple of blocks away, and that's why they do what they do. So it's a very complex issue.
And in 2018, you created the City Strategic Planning Commission. Can you tell me about why you created that and why the residents' involvement was such an integral part of it?
Yeah. As I looked around, I realized that each of our commercial areas, this strategic planning group was really aimed at the commercial areas in the city. It wasn't aimed at the residential areas. And I recognized that each of the commercial areas in the city is intrinsically different. The Triangle is different from Robertson, is different from La Cienega. And each of them needed some help and some vision. And what I really wanted to know was what did the residents want in each of these areas? And knowing what the residents wanted, what was it going to take to get it? And so I put together this group of residents, and we had some landlords there, and we had some landowners there, and we had conversation about, well, here's what we'd really like to see, and then some of the realities of this. Well, this land is really expensive, and that's just not going to work. We're going to have to do something a little different. And I really wanted that interaction of our real wish list and put that next to reality and see where we could, I wanted to come to a common vision. I wanted the community, everybody, the residents, the landowners, and everybody to come to a consensus, really, of we really think X, whatever X was, would be wonderful in that space. And that was really the reason to do it, was to engender that conversation rather than just sort of guess. I figured if we put smart people in a room and asked them the question and put the facts in front of them, that we could work through what that would look like. And so that's really why I did it. We completed an exercise around the Triangle. it was a thoughtful exercise, and we were beginning the conversation around the La Cienega-Wilshire subway station when my mayoral year ended, and the next mayor didn't continue the program, or changed it up some.
And you spoke about how the metro is soon coming into our city. Can you tell me a little bit about what we can expect to see when it does end up bringing people into Beverly Hills?
Well, it's going to happen in stages. The metro the first stop obviously is La Cienega and Wilshire. And for a while, that is going to be the terminus. That's where it's going to end. It's going to turn around and go in the other direction. At the end of time, well, when it's done, excuse me, when it's done, I think it's going to be very good for the city. And it's going to be easy for people who want to work in the city to live elsewhere and commute to work. It'll be really great. I think I see the area around the La Cienega-Wilshire station as changing fairly dramatically over the next little bit. My daughter's 29, she just got married, and I'm thinking that what a great place for her to live. If we had like mixed use, like you see in a lot of other parts of the world, where you have commercial on the bottom with things that would support the housing above, apartments above. And not huge apartments, but smaller apartments, because I think today people her age and near her age aren't looking for huge apartments. They're looking for things that are more affordable. Maybe you don't need so much parking and things like that. But I can envision an area with modern housing, next-gen housing. And truthfully, the irony of it is it will not only support young people, but it'll support old people. So when I'm ready to get rid of my house, I need a place to live, and I think I'd like to live in a place where I can walk and have amenities, and if I want to go downtown, get on the subway, and the park hopefully will be done. And I see this as developing in that part. And so the bottom layer, the commercial layer, ground floor, could be cafes or dry cleaners or coffee shops or whatever. Arts and leisure, we've talked about, arts and entertainment, we've talked about that. Whatever supports the community. And I really do think that the subway will bring that. In addition, I think it's going to be important that, and I know there's a lot of concern around safety, and so I've been promoting placing a police station, a substation of our police department at the subway. Right now, our police department has grown, which is a good thing. We have more police than we've had in a long time. And I think that my idea is to put the substation at the police substation at the metro station. It'll do a number of things. It'll provide a police presence at the subway. It'll support the southeast, because now we'll have police even closer than they are today. And it'll support the park. I think that having the police close to the park is a good idea too. So for all those reasons, I think that we will provide for the public safety. That's our job one, is to provide for the public safety. And I really do think that we need to be thoughtful in how we manage that. But in sum, I think it's going to be a good thing. And I just think we have to be thoughtful about how we create it.
And regarding safety, during your past terms, that has been one of your main goals, to expand what we do for safety in our community. What improvements have been made recently to the safety of our community?
Well, we've done a lot. We have more cameras in our neighborhoods than we ever have. In my term, we've added probably 1,200 cameras just in the last little bit in the communities. They're not looking at anybody's house, but they're looking at streets and intersections and alleys and things like that. We've added cameras just recently. I was at Nessa, unfortunately, after that horrible vandalism. And we've now installed cameras at all 18 religious institutions so that we have constant vision of them. So we've done that. We've increased the size of the police force. We've bought them new equipment. On the fire safety side, I've actually, I think, probably christened more fire engines than any current council member, just so happened. I think I've christened 5 fire engines.
It's exciting.
It is. I mean, a new fire engine is kind of cool. A new fire engine is even cooler than a new car. It really is. And but I don't get to drive them.
They should let you do that.
Yeah. But we started new programs, for public safety. We've started a nurse practitioner program, which is pretty unique, where we have a nurse practitioner who travels in her own vehicle, we call NP1, with a paramedic, and provides extended care to patients who need it, where you call 911, they don't have to go to the hospital, but they do need some help. He or she, it happens to be a she at the moment, the nurse practitioner can stay and do that and can contact the physician and things like that. In addition, now the nurse practitioners are being proactive, and they know patients who've had some problems, and they'll go and they'll knock on their door every once in a while just to make sure they're okay. We created a program. I actually brought a program from Cedars-Sinai. It's a part of the American College of Surgery to teach normal people, that's everybody, I guess, non-physicians, normal people, how to stop bleeding. Because it's called Stop the Bleed. It's a nationwide program, but I brought it because I thought it was important that, unfortunately, in today's world, if something bad happens, the first responders are likely to be the people standing next to you. And we have to train our residents and our neighbors how to take care of each other, how to, So we brought that program. We've trained, I think, 1,000 people already. We brought some of it to the schools. So I think that's going to be a very useful and good program. And we've extended, we have a mobile stroke unit that, although our response times are very quick, there are parts of the city where not, and this thing could roll and actually deliver stroke care closer to the patient. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, I'm very proud of the fact that I started the movement to ban tobacco in the city. We were way ahead. I was way ahead of the curve on banning e-cigarettes. At the time I suggested it, people said to me, "Oh, that's terrible. How can you do that? There's nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful." And I said, I'm not so sure about that. And of course, here we are 4 or 5 years later, and we know all the problems around e-cigarettes. So, these are things that we've done. I think that we're fortunate that we live in a city where we can do these sorts of things. There aren't many cities in the world that can both afford these kind of programs and have staff that's able to effectuate them in a way that really promotes the public good. But I look back at that and I say, those are pretty important programs, and I think they will have lasting benefit for the community.
And regarding the ban on the sale of tobacco, Beverly Hills is the first city in America to have banned the sale of tobacco at any store in our city. What has been the impact, and what have been the visions, the perspectives from other cities in our country on what we have accomplished?
So we haven't fully banned it yet. The ordinance goes into full effect January of next year, 2021. And that was an opportunity to allow retailers who make money selling cigarettes to find other ways to replace that income and to get rid of their cigarettes. I'll take a little bit more than 30 seconds and get on a soapbox and say the fact that the United States government has not banned the sale of tobacco is really a crime. 500,000 Americans die every year from smoking and smoking-related illness. $300 billion spent in health care costs annually, and 6 million people die worldwide from tobacco. A cigarette is probably the only thing that when used, even when used as indicated, is not good for you. I mean, almost everything else has some benefit. Cigarettes have none, not any. So we're way ahead on this, and hopefully we become a trumpet, right? We're the small end of the trumpet, or the megaphone. And we can our voice is magnified because people know who we are. Mm-hmm. So Manhattan Beach has passed a similar ordinance. Kudos to them for following our lead. And we're just hopeful that by taking a strong position like this, others will follow suit. It'll give people both all of what we did as we investigated this. Our Health and Safety Commission did a great job investigating this. So we have a lot of research and a lot of information. Then at the same time, we have an ordinance that they can craft their own ordinances after. And we just want everybody else to join us with this. This is not about being the first, although we are. This is really about creating a movement that says we need to stop this.
And regarding all the programs about health that you just spoke about, how much of that has been influenced by your background as a physician?
Well, I don't know, probably all of it. I mean, you view the world through the lens that you wear, right? And so that is who I am. And I think that's probably, I naturally drift into that lane because for me it's a relatively comfortable lane and it's something that I think is really, really important. I really do see the lasting benefit to a community of having a robust public health program, and that's basically what we're creating is a robust public health program.
And there's a lot of new exciting technologies coming in our city, one of which is Beverly Hills Fiber. We've already been developing a lot of the technologies, although the infrastructure isn't fully ready yet. But that would mean that Beverly Hills will be the internet provider of the residents. So why is it so important or beneficial for the city to be providing internet access for their constituents?
First off, it is delayed, unfortunately, but we're working through those issues. The internet is both the present and the future, right? We all know that, and high-speed fiber ultimately will facilitate not only our resident experience, but our business experience. And so if we can provide reliable high-speed fiber at less cost than any of the commercial providers can, it offers us a huge advantage, a huge advantage in attracting business and a huge advantage to residents who have the ability to use this fiber. I also think that if we control the fiber, it allows us, there are some who can't afford it, who are disadvantaged by the fact that they can't afford it. And, you know, as a city, we can say, well, guess what? You can have it too. And I think that that's fair. I think that, you know, some of our seniors, some people who just can't afford to pay for internet service should have it also. So I think there are lots of advantages to it. I think we can, we'll have the ability to control it. I think that there has been some disaffection with some of our providers of internet services, and I think that if the city takes a strong position on this, that we will be able to provide it better and cheaper than anybody else, hopefully maybe even for free.
So you speak a lot about taking proactive measures on a lot of things in our community. We have a lot of mountain ranges and a lot of trees and landscapes up in the hills of Beverly Hills. What are the measures that are taken to make sure that there aren't any accidental wildfires that are sparking or any other dangers?
Yeah, that's a great question too. We've spent a lot of time in the last little bit. I actually went up and some of the residents up there wanted to show me around and some of their concerns about the trees that are in Truesdale in particular. As of today, we've actually removed, I think, 9 or 11 of 13 trees that had to go. We have a very aggressive position now in terms of removing other trees that are dangerous. They are currently being identified. Our city crews, including our fire chief and others, are actually marking trees that have to be either trimmed or removed, mostly removed. At the same time, the majority of trees that might be a risk are on private property. And so as of last night, we had a council meeting last night, I've asked the city manager to put in front of us, and I hope at our next meeting, an ordinance that will allow the city to deal with trees on private property. Because even if we remove city trees, and the city trees for the most part are pretty well maintained, and therefore a little bit less of a risk than others that are not, but it doesn't really help us if we do all this stuff for city trees and yet there's this mass of privately owned trees that really need to either come down or be trimmed or whatever. But in order for that to happen, there has to be an ordinance passed. The city has to pass an ordinance. So last night I asked the city manager to fast track that, and I think by our next meeting we should have some language that will allow us the ability to move quickly to take care of these trees. And so I'm optimistic we're going to get this, certainly the dangerous ones, done as quickly as we possibly can.
And switching gears a little bit, a couple of years ago you created the committee called Next Gen for 25 to 45-year-old residents to really get together and envision the future of our community. Can you tell me a little bit about what has come out of their committee, such as Next Night and other things that we should be excited to see?
So that I created that in 2015. It actually started when I was on a trip in New York with the Chamber of Commerce, and we were meeting with a business, and this was a young couple that was selling clothes for young people down in Soho. And as we had this conversation, the owners knew more about our demographics than I did, and that made me nervous. And what they said was, but you're an older crowd, you're not. And I went and I looked, and it was true. And I realized that what was missing here was the voice of the people in those couple of decades, 25 to 45. And so we put together a group. Derek, who's come with me here today, Ontiveros, is the chair of it. It's taken us 3+ years to kind of get some traction in it. We had to structure it right. But what's happened is we have a group now of committed, it's not only young people, it's people who are all committed to the mission. So there are some older people in the room too, but they're all committed to this mission of, and it starts with the question, for the 25 to 45-year-olds, what's missing? What would you like to see in Beverly Hills, and how can we go get it? And so it starts with that, and the next night is really an expression of the fact that this next Beverly committee, the Next Generation Committee, is here and they're active, and it's an attempt to advertise the fact that we want participation from everybody in these age groups and anybody else who wants to be part of this mission to come help us create a city that will be more attractive to people in that age range. Along the way, it's an opportunity to teach people who are otherwise not connected to the city what it is to be connected to the city, how to manage with the city, how to approach the city, and how to get things done, how to advocate for themselves and for their causes. And ultimately, I think what will come from this will be a group of the next generation leaders, the people who, having been active in the city and having gotten stuff done, will ultimately go on to take roles like I'm sitting in, and if that happens, that's a great thing.
And speaking of next generation leaders, our public schools, as you mentioned earlier, are such an amazing part of our community. What aspect of them do you think really plays into the health of our community of Beverly Hills?
Well, we've always said that the three parts of the stool are fire, police, and schools, and I think that's really true. People come to this community for safety, public safety, and they come for the schools. And, as I said, my daughter went through the schools. It was a great experience for her, and I think everybody is looking for that. I think the city has to be a partner with the school district. The school district is its own separate entity. It's got its own elected officials and its own budgets, and it gets its money for the most part, from sources from the state. And although the city contributes a lot of money, and I think that contribution is in recognition of how important the schools are, but at the same time, the city gets to use school facilities and fields and things like that. So this is really a partnership. I mean, we're one community. We have essentially one resident base. It's not exactly coincident, but it's close. And I think that anything we can do to keep the schools healthy and growing, prospering, it ultimately brings all of that to the city too. It's all the same. It's it's one side or the other, but it's all very much a part of who we are, and very important for us to be mindful of the health of the schools and things we can do to help them.
And how does our city council and our elected school board work together to ensure that our schools are projected to do amazing in the future?
At different times, different school boards and different city councils have had different relationships. At the moment, I think that our council and our school board has a really good relationship. And I know that we meet periodically to talk about things. I personally meet with members of the school board just one-on-one to catch up, to hear what they're thinking and things like that. At the end of the day, all organizations function best when people can talk to each other. And if we create an environment where school board members and city council members can sit and talk to each other and even debate, but ultimately come to a consensus about whatever the issue is, I think we're going to do fine. And it doesn't mean that we're going to agree 100% about everything, but it does mean that we're going to have a real conversation, and at the end of the day, we should come away with a real sense of how we can make it happen together. And I think that's happening. I think that we're doing a good job at that.
So switching gears a little bit, LA County has recently decided to switch their voting machines to be electronic. Can you tell me a little bit about what Beverly Hills' response has been to that?
You can still vote by mail, and we are actually encouraging everybody to vote by mail because it's simple and it's easy and you can avoid this confusion. But the machine itself goes something like that. Imagine an iPad, and the iPad only has 4 names. And it happens that by random order, it happens that I'm number 5. So on this first page of the iPad, you're not going to see my name. If you want to get to me, you have to push a button that says More. Confusing because next to the button that says More, there's a button that says Next. They're not that different, are they? If you actually hit the button that says Next instead of More, you go to the next contest. You'll never see my name. But if you understand that you have to hit the More button, there's another issue. So on page 1, you perhaps pick 2 people. But then you see the More button and you decide you're going to do it. You hit the More button, you see my name. You decide you want to vote for me. I'm grayed out. You can't vote for me at that point because you've already picked 2. So the More button now becomes a Less button. So now you have to hit the Less button. You have to pick one of the 2 above that you don't want. Then you have to hit the More button, and then you have to vote for me. It's a cumbersome system. It was designed, I don't know what they were thinking, 10 years, $300 million. I can't imagine that the county had that kind of money to spend on this, but obviously they did. The city council, Ms. Bossi and I, who are both running and incumbents, recused ourselves, but our city council, the 3 remaining council members, voted to sue LA County because they thought that this was just unfair and unreasonable. And unfortunately, the county registrar said to the courts, well, we don't have any time to fix it. And the court said, well, what do you expect us to do? And that was kind of the end of it. I think the suit continues. It will probably have little benefit to me if I were to lose. But nonetheless, I think the sense of right, and there are other cities that have now joined us, and there are large conglomerations of cities, something called contract cities, which has, I think, 75 cities in it, and independent cities, which has about 40, have all joined to say, well, this is nuts. And they all have elections coming in November, and they're nervous about that. It's unclear what's going to happen with this. I don't know that we're going to get to Iowa, where it didn't work at all. Somebody said that there's some concerns that in the corona world, that the touch screens actually the bugs will live for 5 days. I don't know if the county is going to wipe them down. I mean, I think there's some things like this that maybe the county needs to work through before this thing goes live on February 22nd. They actually went live for people with disabilities, I think, on Saturday. But the only other thing to be said is that there is, I think the county has said you have to have a paper ballot. So if you do go to the polls, I think you can still request a paper ballot if the device confuses you. Also, there are only 2 polling places in the city, unlike the traditional where you can pull up to somebody's driveway, run out and vote and get in. You have to go to City Hall. It'll be in the municipal gallery at City Hall. Or there's a room in the Hilton that also is going to be a polling place. And if all of that's not confusing enough, they've extended the voting period to 11 days. So while February 3rd is Election Day,
March 3rd?
March 3rd is Election Day, you'll be able to vote for the 10 days that precede that. All very new and different. The county has not done a great job in educating anybody about it. We're trying to. The city's put out information about it. There's some on our website, things like that. So it's going to be a challenge. As I said, the simplest thing for most people is to vote by mail. You know, if you're interested, you can get the application to vote by mail, and then the ballot will come to you at home, and you can do what you have to do.
So you are a candidate for City Council once again. What new initiatives can we look forward to for your next term?
You know, I think the city is at, there are 2 parts to that question, or 2 parts to that answer. The first is that some of the things that we've started are just not done. I mean, you know, a lot of these health initiatives and safety initiatives that we started, I think have begun and are progressing very nicely, but I do think that there's more to do. And beyond that, I think we're really going to be at a very critical time in the city's history. We're going to see all kinds of development on the west side of the city as the Hilton comes forward with whatever their plans are going forward. We haven't seen those yet. On the east side of the city, we're going to see the subway and all of the change that that's going to bring. And we talked about that a little bit, about what that transit-oriented development is going to look like. And we know that in the middle, in the heart, in the triangle, there are landowners and merchants who have plans to do things there that will also transform parts of the city. So we're living at this very critical moment in time where we have to make smart decisions. We have to make them pretty efficiently. Because there's so much going on that we can't get lost. They can't get labored. They have to, and they can't collide with each other. They have to be coordinated. Otherwise, we're going to have so much going on, nobody will be able to do anything. And I really think the city needs seasoned leadership to do that. I don't think that this is going to be a time to be able to do this kind of on the fly. I think that really these are difficult decisions that have to be made. I think they have to be thoughtful decisions that have to be critically analyzed, and I think that we have to come up with a cogent plan to get it all done as quickly as we can, and to get on with the business of the city. At the same time, we're challenged with the changing face of retail, and what does that look like with the extraordinary growth of Amazon and online sales and things like that. And so we have to help. We have to help our businesses be successful, and I think that I have some ideas about how to do that. I think we have to change some of our ordinances to allow things that heretofore we've not allowed. I think we have to lessen some of the restrictions. We've done some of this with our parking requirements for restaurants just a month or so ago. But it's a time of change. It's going to be very much a time of evolution for the city, and I think that you need vision to do that. You need to be able to see forward. And I think we have to have the ability to execute that efficiently.
So we have a lot to look forward to.
It's an exciting time. It's really an exciting time. I think we're going to look back at this time and just be amazed at the kinds of things that come from it. I often think about the birth of the city, what's almost the birth of the city, when Rodeo Drive was not Rodeo Drive, right? And when guys like Fred Heyman were just kind of envisioning what this was going to be. And, and here we are 50 years later, and from that vision, from that creative vision and understanding, they created today's Rodeo Drive, And I hope that in 50 years, when people look back, they take a look at what we're doing today, and they say, wow, those guys did a great job, guys and gals, did a great job, and look at what they created. And that's really our challenge. That's where we have to be. And I only hope we can be 80% as successful as the folks who came before us.
So Dr. Gold, we have so much to look forward to and so much to be excited about. So as my last question, I like to ask this to all my guests. What is the best advice you have ever received?
Learn how to take a deep breath. I think that as I've gotten older, I have learned that if I slow it down and actually think about what I want to do, I'll get a better result. If I just react, sometimes I don't get the result that I want. And I think that as I grow older, the time, it's been said that the physical world and the psychological, emotional world mirror each other. And so you have a stimulus and a response. And as I get older, the space between the stimulus and the response gets a little bigger. And in that space, it's in that little bit of space where you actually have the ability to think through the result you want and respond in a way that's most likely to get you that result. And so I think the simple way of saying it is that before you react, take a deep breath.
So Dr. Gold, thank you so much for being here with me today. Voting starts on March 3rd. Make sure to vote however you can. Thank you for watching this episode of The Danesh Show. For KBEV 6, I'm Eva Danesh.